Junípero Serra, Ferrer, OFM. Given name Miguel Jose Serra Ferrer, has been given many titles. The father of the California missions, the apostle of California, evangelizer of the West, a founding father of the United States, United States' first Hispanic saint. Not everyone admires Serra, though. Since the canonization in 2015, memorials of the patron of vocations have been vandalized multiple times, both in public places and sacred spaces. Here we see a few examples. This is when my handle used to be Saint Serra 1. So this is directed towards me from somebody named Pythagoras. Serra's a criminal, should have been hanged. He's a more successful version of Himmler. Here we see a man holding a sign outside of Mission Dolores. That's the actual mission church there. He condoned genocide. Now you want to sanctify. Shame, shame. This is at Mission Carmel, just days after the canonization on church property. And this is in Monterey, down the street from Mission Carmel, a few miles away. And this is actually one of the oldest statues of Serra in the United States. And you can see he was beheaded. Once the canonization was announced by Pope Francis in January 2015, many in the media, both Catholic and mainstream, portrayed it as controversial. One was either for it or against it. Here we see fact or fiction, saint or not, saint or scoundrel. This one, of course, just bringing up the controversy. The Vatican defending the decision. Here, of course, controversial is also in the title. This is probably one of the more level-headed, and it wasn't in a popular source, but from commonplace.org. And this is from Stephen Hackle, The Competing Legacies of Junípero Serra. And here, a little more level-headed, pioneer, saint, villain, not this either or proposition. However, Serra's story is not so black and white. It's really complicated. Boyd Cothran, professor of Indigenous and Cultural History at York University in Toronto, succinctly encapsulates the discussion of Serra by saying, it's really complicated. This was the major reason that I wrote my first book, Saint Junípero Serra. Note its subtitle, Making Sense of the History and Legacy, especially for my young students. To help us make sense of Saint Junípero Serra, I will be talking about the following. Background to Junípero Serra, Serra, the miracle, Serra's legacy, Serra's relevance in the past, the controversy, Serra on trial, how did we get here, and some recommendations. And as was brought to your attention earlier, we should have some time for some Q&A. Background. What kind of life did Saint Junípero Serra lead? Serra was born and baptized on November 24, 1713, in the town of Petra, Majorca, Spain. Majorca is the largest of the Balearic Islands in the Mediterranean Sea. He grew up in a poor and deeply religious community. He had a sister. His teachers were Franciscan priests who noticed his deep faith and intellect when he was just a young boy. In 1737, after many years of study, he was ordained a Catholic priest of the Orders of Friars Minor, also known as the Franciscans. He would take the name Junípero after St. Francis's sidekick. His main ministry from 1740 to 1749 was professor of sacred theology and philosophy at Lulean University in Palma, Majorca. He was very popular with his students, yet something really gnawed at his heart. He felt God calling him to serve in some other way. When the call came from New Spain for missionaries, he responded with a resounding yes. On December 17, 1749, after a difficult time crossing the Atlantic, he landed at Veracruz in modern-day Mexico. For the next 20 years, he served communities, mainly the Pame Indians, who were already Catholic. His dream had always been to bring the good news of Jesus Christ to those who never heard it before. He would get his wish in 1769, a few days' journey south of San Diego. The year 2019 marked the 250th anniversary of this event. For the next 15 years, Serra would set up 9 missions in the present-day state of California, from San Diego in the south to San Francisco in the north. He died at Mission Carmel on August 28, 1784. Serra the Miracle. Serra International President Mario Biscardi challenged members in 2018, quote, "If you need inspiration, look no further than our own patron, Saint Junípero Serra, whose travails show us what prayer, faith, and sacrifice can achieve," end quote. He was spot on. When Serra left old California, what we know today as the Baja California, a state in Mexico, as shown in this 1787 map by Diego Troncoso, he was an old man who came to uncharted territory. He would rise above the life of an ordinary man, recall that he discerned God's call to be a missionary, and sacrificed so much by leaving his loved ones to serve Christ by serving strangers. He even shared with the governor that if the natives should kill him, that they should be forgiven and pardoned. He tried his best to learn native languages so that he could help them understand the faith. He stood up for justice, penning what has been called or coined as the Native Bill of Rights by some. And he was also a man of his time, using self-flagellation as a form of penance and upholding corporal punishment, common practices during Serra's day. For many of us, it is not a shock that Pope Francis dispensed of the usually required second miracle. Serra's life is a second miracle. He was 5'2", short by even the standards of his time. He voluntarily left the comforts of home, knowing full well he would never return. On his first night in New Spain, just outside Veracruz, he was bitten by an insect. It would cause him great pain off and on for the rest of his life. He was asthmatic. He's only expected to live a few days. We know this because he was baptized hours after he was born. And look at what he accomplished. He lived 70 years, 9 months, 4 days. The average age in late 18th century Spain was between 30 and 40 years. His life was one well lived. Many of us already knew this, having prayed to him to intercede on our behalf for many, many years. Serra's legacy. These numbers come from the whole early California population project at the Huntington Library in San Marino, California, near Pasadena. They were presented in 2006. The numbers are based on church records between 1769 to 1836. Keep in mind that the Spaniard area of influence was only about 50 to 60 miles from the coast. So if you see here are the eventual 29 California missions and their proximity to the coastline. The majority of native Californians lived outside this area. Serra's legacy was 101,000 baptisms, 28,000 marriages, 71,000 burials at all 21 missions and from the Los Angeles Plaza Church and the Santa Barbara Presidio. As Jeffrey Burns, As Jeffrey Burns, retired archivist of the Archdiocese of San Francisco, put it in an America magazine article, quote, "What we, Catholics, celebrate with the canonization is not a failed missionary policy, and certainly not the death of so many indigenous people. What we celebrate is a man burning with missionary zeal who loved and engaged the native people of California." End quote. I too am confident that he wanted to do good by bringing Christ to the Indians. Serra never intended the outcome to be mass deaths. What he intended was the baptized Indians being a light in the darkness. What he desired, but was never fully realized, can be encapsulated in the story of three people. While studying to become a priest in Rome between 1835 to 1838, Pablo Toc wrote a description of life as a mission Indian, gave a public recitation of a poem at the Polyglot Academy, created a dictionary of the language of his people, the Luiseno, and an account of the native peoples in Southern California. His writings are the earliest from a California Indian. Estanislao was from a rancheria 50 miles east of Mission San Jose. He could read and write, was a vaquero or mule tamer, and rose to alcalde, the head mission Indian or like mayor. Once when he went to his traditional home for a visit, he stayed longer than what was agreed upon. A search party was sent, and Estanislao confirmed he had no intention of coming back to the mission. An altercation took place. The Spanish and their Indian allies attacked. Estanislao and his Indian allies repelled Mexican forces twice. Father Duran, pastor at Mission San Jose, received a pardon for Estanislao after the fugitive returned to the mission. Estanislao died due to an epidemic that struck the mission in 1839. Surely the mercy shown by Father Duran made the Indians who grew up with revenge as the way to deal with problems take pause. Then there's Lope Inigo, the Mission Santa Clara Indian, who on November 23rd, 1839, petitioned Governor Jose Castro for a land grant. This area is today in Mountain View, California, kind of close to the Googleplex. Lope was one of a few California Indians to be granted land for his service to church and state. He lived during the Spanish, Mexican, and American periods in California. These are just three examples of mission Indians. Catholic California natives whose descendants go back to Spanish mission history is an area where more research is needed. That's a little hint for Will. Hopefully he'll take that up. Serra's relevance in the past. Starting in 1821, the Franciscans were kicked out of the missions by the government of Mexico, and the missions fell into disrepair. Mexico could not finance their new lands. Native Christians were neglected. In 1848, because of the gold rush, Americans began to come in droves, and statehood followed in 1850. The native got in the way of so-called progress. In the late 19th century, California seemed a place in need of a past. To many, Serra embodied the greatness of civilization. Opponents of this call it the mission myth, that natives happily accepted the new situation they found themselves. Some of the following depictions, only representing a fraction of those that exist, help tell a story of Serra's legacy. The first we saw earlier with its head cut off, here it is with its head, at Fort Ord, Monterey, California, were erected by Jane L. Stanford of Stanford University fame. And this dates to 1891. I think it is the oldest statue of Serra in the United States. The next, we probably know because it was recently attacked by a mob in Golden Gate Park over the summer. Located in Golden Gate Park, San Francisco, it was commissioned by James Phelan, mayor of San Francisco from 1897 to 1902, and executed by Douglas Tilden, dedicated in November 1907. This one is located in our United States Capitol, National Statuary Hall. It was dedicated in 1931 to much fanfare. The main supporters of this were the native sons of the Golden West. This one is near my home. The Serra sculpture by Kenyon Kaiser was commissioned by the San Mateo Serra Club, donated to the city of San Mateo in 1969, the year that marked the 200th anniversary of the founding of Mission San Diego. If you visited any of the California missions, odds are you have seen the statue commissioned by William H. Hannon, a devout Catholic philanthropist from Los Angeles who made his money in real estate, I believe. And it seems from these examples from the late 19th century to the 1960s that Serra had a cross-section of supporters. Actually, I should say 1980s, because this here, I think that started in the 1980s. That's a picture of my son there a few years ago. The controversy. This perspective is rooted in pain and suffering. It is a tragic history. Our nation's first original sin was the decimation of of natives. It is important to note that it worked its way westward from the east, from predominantly white Anglo-Saxon Protestant America. The Spanish story in California gets wrongly placed with that history oftentimes. Again, as Boyd Cothran, professor of Indigenous and Cultural History at York University in Toronto put it, quote, "In a lot of ways, what does Serra represent? In their minds, the natives, Serra represents the totality of the colonial experience. So when they're criticizing Serra, they're criticizing coercive Christian colonization and massive deaths and loss of culture. Opponents contest that Serra perpetrated genocide, enslaved others, and was cruel. Serra on trial. How did we get here? First, regarding genocide. Keep in mind that 200 plus years had passed since Cortez and the conquistadors and their native allies conquered the Aztec. Serra and his contemporary religious were aware of this part of Spanish history. They wanted to change the hearts and minds with the cross, not the sword. It is true that many native Californians who came in contact with the mission system perished prematurely. This is almost entirely due to epidemics and pandemics. Benjamin Madley, Associate Professor of History, University of California, Los Angeles, puts it into focus in his 2016 book, An American Genocide, quote, "The indigenous population of California under Spanish rule dropped from 300,000 prior to 1769 to 250,000 in 1834. After Mexico won its independence from Spain, and after the secularization of the coastal missions by the Mexican government in 1834, the indigenous population suffered a much more drastic decrease in population to 150,000. And these are my notes. There were 3 province-wide pandemics, 1806, 1828, and 1838. Madley continues, the period immediately following the US conquest of California has been characterized by numerous sources as a genocide. Under US sovereignty, after 1848, the indigenous population plunged from perhaps 150,000 to 30,000 in 1870 and reached its nadir of 16,000 in 1900, end quote. The Spanish government, with the help of the church, was trying to create a little Spain here to keep Russia and Britain at bay. It begs the question, why would the Spanish intentionally slaughter Indians? Next, I would like to speak to the accusation of enslavement. The missions only worked if laborers were plenty. According to scholars James Sandos and George Harwood, missions were designed to attract, not destroy. After learning the basics of what it meant to be a Spanish Catholic, the native was required to work like the Spaniard. To leave the mission, one had to ask for permission. If one did not return on the prescribed day, one was seen as a deserter. It is estimated that 4 to 10% actually did this. People from the mission would be sent out to retrieve the deserter. They would be given multiple chances to return. Once the final request was made and there was no response, soldiers, including mission Indian auxiliaries like Lope Inigo, would bring the culprit back by force if needed. The fear was the mission Indian would revert to old practices counter to Christianity, thus putting their eternal salvation in jeopardy. Last, a few contend that Serra was cruel. In the previous example, Serra would have allowed for corporal punishment. This would happen to a Spanish soldier who deserted too. It would have happened to an errant schoolboy in Spain if he misbehaved. Cal Poly San Luis Obispo professor emeritus of history, Dan Krieger, explained in a Santa Maria Sun news article that thick whips of cord were used that rarely broke skin. We can kind of see something like it here. In this case, Serra was a man of his time. The society he lived in did not frown upon corporal punishment. Andrew Galvin, a Ohlone Indian and curator at Mission Dolores in San Francisco, sums it up best. In a San Francisco magazine article, he asserted, "I blame the system, not the individual. Serra is a very good person operating in a very bad situation." Serra experts such as Beebe and Sienkiewicz, Bolton, Geiger, Guest, Hackle, Orfalea have exonerated Serra of the accusations that he perpetrated genocide, enslaved others, and was cruel. They tend to agree on 2 points. He was a man influenced by his time and a zealous evangelist. So what is all the fuss about? I'm always suspect about people who want to tell you what the historical truth is. These are the sources used for a YouTube video that I came across recently entitled, "Telling the Truth About California Missions." Take a look at these sources. Across the Thorns by Elias Castillo. Indians, Franciscans, and Spanish Colonization by Jackson and Castillo. Bad Indians by Deborah Miranda. This is actually a primary source, Life in a California Mission by Jean-Francois de la Perouse, who is French and really he's a fan of the Enlightenment and not a fan of the Catholic Church, who is kind of living, Spanish Catholicism was living in the Middle Ages kind of at that time still. Junípero, Serra, the Vatican, and Enslavement Theology by Daniel Fogel. Take a look at these sources and see for yourself if the authors are objectively using the historical method, aside from, of course, number 4. Since 2015, statues of St. Junípero Serra have been desecrated by American Indian activists and their sympathizers, 4 times on Catholic Church property. Mission Carmel, Old Mission Santa Barbara, Mission San Gabriel, and Mission San Rafael. Catholic sacred spaces have been vandalized at Mission Santa Cruz, Old Mission Santa Barbara, Mission San Francisco, and Mission San Jose. Pictured here, this is Mission San Jose. Stanford University, for the most part, erased any mention to Serra from its campus. Statues have been vandalized on public property on numerous occasions at Carmel, San Francisco, Sacramento, Los Angeles, and Ventura. Oh, the irony. All these place names are rooted in Catholic history and belief. Maybe attacking California place names is the next Inquisition and crusade for the social justice warriors. How did we get here? I surmise that we find ourselves at this moment in time because the pendulum has swung from the mission myth to the Garden of Eden myth. Both romantic versions are incorrect. The historical truth is more complicated. Society seems to be moving away from a common understanding of reality based on natural law and subscribes to legal positivism. Assertions and arguments will begin to have more weight than the historical record as evidence. In US schools, history is being taught less, and social studies is taking its place, And the effect of this is what we have in common in the human condition is being lost. Our traditional motto as a nation, E pluribus unum, out of many one, is being supplanted by relativism, identity politics, and critical race theory. As the populace becomes more secular, religious illiteracy is going down, and society seems to be more indifferent when it comes to religious belief in the public sphere, being shared in the public square, and at its worst, intolerant and violent. My recommendations, the greatest recommendation I can make is to read online for free the writings of Junípero Serra, to see for yourself what his vision was, motivations were, as well as his challenges, dreams, and successes. He will not disappoint, but inspire one to walk the via positiva. You can find it on my website, missions1769.com, on my resources page under further readings. Thank you very much.